Welcome to day one of our Hay Crisis special. We're talking to 3 different equestrians over 3 days to find out how they and their horses are coping with the UK's hay shortage. 2025 has seen the driest spring recorded in 50 years, and England specifically has had its driest spring in more than 100 years. This isn't an issue that will just go away. It's predicted that climate change will reduce UK spring hay yields by a further 50% by 2080, changing the landscape for Britain's million horses and their owners. The lack of grass growth this year has also meant that horses were fed hay throughout the summer, which has further contributed to the supply issues, and the prices have skyrocketed. In some places across the UK, a small bale of hay or a big round has doubled. Not to mention the cost of delivery that has jumped up by 50% due to the rise in fuel costs. Equestrians around the country are understandably worried about securing enough hay for the winter and struggling with the dramatic financial increase, alongside the cost of living crisis that still remains a constant reality. So what can horse owners do? Well, Emeline Hannaley, Horse Care and Welfare Education Manager at the British Horse Society, joins us now with expert help, advice and tips for all of us horse owners affected by the shortage. Emeline, welcome to Curious Equestrian.
Thanks very much, Anna. Really delighted to be speaking with you today about this really important issue about concerns for the hay supplies in the UK.
And what worries have you heard, Emeline, from people on the ground?
Yeah, I think it started certainly early on springtime as we were seeing those really dry conditions, very not spring-like for the UK. And that has been found, in the UK, we had the driest spring recorded in 50 years. And for England, that was its driest spring in more than 100 years. Exacerbated then by that continued dry, hot summer weather. Reports were starting to trickle in. Actually, there are concerns about how much that first hay cut has yielded. As a team, a lot of us are horse owners. We have a lot of connections with the farming community. I certainly do. And I was talking particularly to farmers. I'll give a disclaimer. I am in the East Midlands, so that's only applicable to that area that I was speaking to. And there was worries. I spoke with a couple of farmers and landowners who cut hay. On an average year, one of them said, compared to last year, I'm 50% down on the yield. On a really excellent year, I'm 75% down. For landowners who are cutting hay on their own land, they were 45-50% down as well. So I think then that started to represent across the forums, looking at farmers commenting on agricultural Facebook posts, for example. The reports were consistently coming in certain areas of the UK, certainly not all. And I think, that's positive to hear that some areas weren't affected, that they did still have really good hay cuts coming in. But it's certainly widespread, not just for us, but also for the farmers. And of course, during that continued hot spell, the grass turned very brown. It's a very brown landscape, wasn't it, across a lot of the UK? And therefore, livestock and horses were then having to be fed supplementary hay, which ideally those stocks would have been used for the winter, not having to be supplemented during June, July, August for some people.
Oh, and I'm nodding away, Emmeline, because
Yeah.
that was certainly our story in my area. And for me, feeding hay throughout the summer is unheard of. Usually
Mm.
plenty of grazing to go around, but we were putting up hay nets upon hay nets across the fencing and the fence lines just to try and supplement the fact we had dust, which is so unusual. It's the time of year where you can usually rest your hay budgets and let the hay budget build in your bank account, because you don't usually have to fork out for 50, 70, 100 bales of hay. So really, really worrying for horse owners this summer as they began to realise and as you mentioned earlier on, later spring as well, began to realise this was a very different landscape. How difficult do you think it is at the moment for horse owners in the areas where hay prices have skyrocketed and supplies are very low? How is that? How are horse owners coping?
I think in the main, horse owners, we can be really supportive of each other. And it's great that we're having this discussion on this podcast because we recognise, on top of everything else, it's not just hay prices that are increasing. We're seeing it, aren't we, in every single aspect almost of our lives. That cost of living crisis remains a constant reality for so many people. And I think that I know it's difficult and we say it, but don't panic is the first thing. It's important to be having those conversations and speaking. If you do have a regular supplier, be speaking to them. If you have, I'm sure a lot of people will have done, but if you haven't, really start having those conversations. We've heard of fantastic suppliers who are really giving their all for their customers in trying to source their hay. So there are suppliers as well, they're in a difficult position, and I know that a lot of them are reaching out across the UK to try and source hay for their customers. So it is difficult. The good thing is that there is now with horses is that we don't just solely have to rely on hay. There's also other forage-based feeds that you can have a look at. And I think now is a really good time to really assess your horse. They are absolutely all individuals. And what diet works for one horse might be different for another horse. So the feed companies, of which there are many, and I won't name them, they will often offer a free nutritional helpline. Now, of course, it will be to discuss the products that they have, but I think that's a good starting point. If you didn't want to go down the route of that, there are, of course, excellent independent nutritionalists as well. There would be a charge, you'd have to look into the individual costs of that. But in the long run, getting a review of your horse's feeding plan for the winter, I think would be a really good start. Look at the individual feeding plan for your horse. It can be quite easy to overfeed, I think. And it's always that balance, isn't it, between making sure that our friends, we hear of friends, forage, and freedom. We don't want our horses stood in stables for a long time not eating. It's not good for them mentally. It's not good for them physically. Obviously, we're worried about gastric ulcers. We're worried about colic. So it's about getting that balance and looking at how can we maximize the supply that we have for our horses.
Really interesting you mentioned that, Emily, because we had a vet on recently, Katie, who was talking about horses' weight and how that is actually another crisis that we're facing at the moment, that we have a real obesity problem with our horses and that most horses are actually overweight, and
Mm,
that we are overfeeding, and that obviously horses aren't doing as much as they would do if they were out feral or wild or, living a natural life, and the
yeah.
problems and the challenges we face as horse owners in trying to replicate that and get them into as healthy a lifestyle as possible. So really interesting that actually we can use this time, a time that actually feels quite panicky and worrying, concerning, but
Mm,
actually to reevaluate how we're feeding our horses and what they might need or what they might not need, and actually try and face up to, are we overfeeding hay or haylage, or are we giving too many dinners? What are we
mhm.
feeding them? And using it as an opportunity, if they are slightly overweight, to actually bring them in line, get them fit and healthy, and maybe try and actually face up to the fact that we may be overfeeding our beloved horse.
Exactly. And we want, as we say, we want to keep that balance for their mental and physical health. The British Horse Society, we actually do a lot of work, Anna, directly with horse owners. We go out what we call our horse health days, and we take a weighbridge out to yards. We work with horse owners directly. We understand, a lot of yards don't have access to a weighbridge. They're expensive for a start. So by getting an accurate weight for your horse is a really good first step to do in that overall assessment. We assess approximately 2.5 to 3,000 horses a year, which is a huge amount. And over 60% of the horses that we do see are either overweight and a small minority are obese. There are also a very small minority that are underweight. The rest, thankfully, are doing well. They're at a healthy weight. So we understand how difficult it is. It is not easy um, getting horses to lose weight, especially during the spring and summer. Their natural rhythm is to store that excess energy to then be able to use it during the winter months where naturally that food would have been harder to come by. It would have decreased in nutritional value. But we've overridden that a little bit in the way in which we manage our horses now. So Anna, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Now is a great opportunity to really reevaluate your horse's winter feeding plan. And with that, there are brilliant, what can we call them? Feeding devices, I'll call them that, out on the market at the moment to help slow down that consumption of hay. Because, like we say, we don't want to give our horses, if we work out their ration and then we're worried that 2 hours later it's all gone, that's not a nice feeling either. There are feeding devices that are out there, lots of enrichment ideas to help slow down that rate of consumption, extend that eating period, and really maximize those feeding opportunities. And at the same time, using that winter to your advantage. If your horse is overweight, is carrying excess weight, we can, use this natural rhythm then to help the horse safely and healthily lose any excess weight that they're carrying.
And ticking two boxes. And I like the way you say use this time to evaluate whether your horse is overweight or if there is an obesity issue or whether they are the perfect weight instead of
Yeah,
feeling helpless like I know that I certainly did when I heard about the hay crisis and obviously was seeing it around me and the fact that it was difficulty in sourcing hay and making sure there was enough hay throughout the autumn and winter, which we're still all not sure about. It can feel very overwhelming. So I like the use of language you're using, Emmeline, to say, take back control, to make us feel like we have a say over what's happening when it can feel like everything's escalating out of our grip. To say,
yeah,
let's get a plan, let's get a management plan, let's see what's happening. How much hay is there with your supplier? Can you book that ahead? Can you say, let's arrange our deliveries and is there enough in his store for you as a client, and also
yeah,
looking at what our individual horse needs and do they really need as much as we give them, which I
yeah.
can be quite difficult. You talk about these feed management devices, Emmeline. Can you run us through some of these ideas for those who might be a bit stumped?
Yeah. So if your horse is on a controlled diet and we want to maximize that length of time the horse is going to be eating and chewing for, which we know is really good for them, simple things, and they don't have to be expensive either, which is another really important point. Hay nets, if needed, you can double those up. There has been some recent research which shows that horses that can lead to some frustration. So with any type of feeding, there is the caveat to do that slowly and gradually over time as well. So you're looking at a 10 to 14 day gradual change to any sort of way in which you feed or any types of feed. That's really important. The horse has got a really sensitive digestive system. So the bacteria that live in there, they need a bit of time to adjust. So it's the same with any change in there. So hay nets are really good. If your horse is turned out and you bring them in, you can find, sometimes they seem really hungry, don't they? And they're grabbing at that hay net to get the hay. Um, so what researchers found, just to help prevent that bit of frustration, is to put a little bit of hay on the floor and let your horse just have a minute to just get some hay and have that feeding sort of satisfaction of that sort of drive to want to eat the hay. So that has been a really interesting insight, and we would, advocate to do that. There's also hay bars, which you can safely fit in your horse's stable. And then there's also things like hay balls where you stuff full the hay ball. The horse has to roll it around. It slows them down. They have to work a bit harder to get that hay out. And enrichment and products are available like that. So you're sort of filling filling the products with the hay, and the horse has to work out, and work a bit harder to get that hay out, to get that forage out. So again, don't have to buy brand new. Go on any social media platform, marketplaces. You'll often see horse owners have got things up for sale. Hopefully that would be a cheaper way if you want to go down that route in which to buy them. So, don't straight away worry, "Oh, I can't afford that." See if there's any sort of, secondhand opportunities to buy these products as well. It's a good thing to do.
Isn't it interesting that we're talking about the slow release feeding, so putting hay in hay nets and hay balls and enrichment? And this not only helps in the hay crisis in terms of making hay last longer, but also helps our horses' general mental health and well-being and enjoyment of the hay as well. And also then in turn, if they need a more slow release feed to manage weight, that then helps. So actually, in a way, this something that is very worrying and concerning and negative is a
Mhm.
way for us to actually reassess how we're distributing feed and whether actually it can benefit our horses in a much more enjoyable way by bringing in some of these enrichment activities and toys and devices to slowly release the hay, but actually make it more interesting in our horse's life.
Definitely. So it can be a big positive in that aspect as well. And again, like the change of the feed, any sort of enrichment item that you introduce, just do it in a safe space. Make sure your horse is comfortable with this item. If they suddenly come in their stable and we've got great enrichment opportunities, but your horse is, really worried about it, we don't want that to happen either. So just making sure that any new item, the horse has a chance to have a look at it, sniff it, get used to it, realize what they've got to do as well. So just watch over your horse the first time that you introduce something. Make sure they understand they've got to roll it to get the feed out or get the hay out, so that they're then not stood there without access to that food because they're not understanding what to do. So yeah, introducing these products as well is really important.
Interesting you mention, Emmeline, as well, the hay nets being double wrapped with two hay
Hmm.
nets. I've seen this, like you, I've been scrolling the forums on Facebook, all the different horsey groups to see how people are coping, what horsey hacks they're thinking of and what they're, what they're experiencing in this hay crisis. Lots of people saying they are double wrapping hay nets. But how
Hmm.
small is too small for the whole? Because if you wrapped two of those ultra tight piggy hay nets, yes, it'd
Yeah,
be
I think
brilliant
that would
because it
probably,
stops it tearing, doesn't it? I mean, a lot of these piggy hay nets also, well, mine certainly do, they bust because they're being jam-packed with hay and then the horses are ripping at the smaller holes. So I can
yeah.
see how double wrapping would help. But what sort of a size of a gap do we need to look for in terms of
Yeah.
making a hay net small or too, smaller holes or too small?
Yeah, brilliant question. And this is where I think leads, if it does become too small, does lead to the horse then becoming frustrated. So with the double hay netting, it might be your sort of the two bigger sized holes. And then as you've mentioned there are products already there where the small hold hay nets, as it were. So it may be that you have a hay net with a bigger hole outside a small hold hay net. But again, it's monitoring your horse, making sure that they can effectively get the hay. But then if your horse is really struggling and it takes them a long time, so we're talking sort of minutes to get a bit of hay out, then I would reassess that. Just
So try and juggle the
have a
different
look.
hole sizes and wrap a few different ones to see sort of the different gaps, the sizes, and how long it takes the horse to pull the hay
Yeah,
out. Yeah, that's
yeah.
interesting and actually could help with some of because some of our hay nets do bust open, don't they? And I,
Mm,
drive at the yard. I know I certainly do, and I think, oh, they've had a gap the size of my fist, and they've just been pulling out the hay all over the floor. So that could be
yes.
a really good solution for those breaking hay nets as well. Emily, we've talked about stabled horses. What about our
Hmm.
horses in the field? Because I know certainly if I think of all the winters gone by that I've been a horsewoman since I was a child, it gets to winter, muddy fields of grazing reduces. We're reliant on hay, and I go out there with a bale of hay and spread it out in piles or maybe half a bale, depending on how many horses are out there, spread it all out and they all happily munch together. But of course, they go through it very quickly. And how often are we ending up poo picking and it's all leftover bits of hay that we're scooping up all over the field floor that's mushed into the mud? What sort of things can we do out in the field to slow down the hay?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those horses that are more kept out 24/7, it's again to assess, first of all, the best place to put the hay. What we don't want to do is have a situation whereby there's too many, there's a really muddy area and hay is getting lost, like you say, it's being stood on, trodden on, sometimes it's slept on, which is great for keeping the horse to have a dry area, but that's not ideal for what we want to be using
No.
hay for. There's different ways in which we can give horses that dry area that they need. So, you can get, depends on obviously what type of hay you've got. You mentioned there the small bales. Have a look, see, can you again use those enrichment hay balls, for example, or is it safe to put up hay nets? Especially on a windy day as well, when you've gone out and you've put hay and then it's like you
It's
see it, half
gone.
of it's blown off
It's
down the
gone.
field, caught up on all the hedge line. It becomes inaccessible to the horse. So that's not good either. So if there's a way of, if you're using the small bales, is there somewhere else, perhaps if it is a windy day, if there's an area which isn't in that line of the wind, if there's a corner out of the jet stream, I suppose we'll call it, to feed that particular day. Hay nets, as we've said, if you've got the big round bales, which a lot of people do now have, you can get those big feeders, often like the farmers have for their sheep or the cows, the metal round feeders. If you can put that in there, open it up and give them access. And I think with that, it's just to watch the wastage at the bottom, making sure if your horse can't get in and reach, the middle bit as it gets low, is can you then scoop that out? Can you then feed that in hay nets, or if needs be, just feed it on the floor so that they then can access that whole bale and you're maximizing the contents of that. If you've got horses that are turned out, and again, research has shown this, you could put a net then over, like, so we have our hay nets, you could then just put a big net over the hay bale as long as it's in a feeder, because what we don't want then is horses getting caught up in the netting, shoes getting stuck and all of
Mm.
that. As long as it's within a feeder, you could then put a hay on just to again slow down that rate of consumption if you've got horses that are overweight and they need a bit more control of their calories that way.
Mm. And it's interesting you talk about planning and management and thinking through and reevaluating now that we're in this hay crisis in the UK. Actually looking at our grazing, if our horses are out for part of the day or out 24/7, because if we've got
Mhm.
hedgerows that go alongside of it, that all counts as forage, doesn't it? So we must also take that into account when we're looking at our grazing, the grass growth, we're looking at the hay we need to feed. If they've also got access to a hedge that is horse friendly and is going to do them some good, that can also take some of the forage and some of the burden, if you like, can't it? If they've got access to nibbles along the hedgerow.
Yeah, definitely. Horses naturally are foraging and grazing animals. They like to pick out the good stuff out of the hedge. So if you do have that space, then yeah, that's great. They will naturally go and have a look and see if there's anything they can pick out and enjoy that way as well.
And we've got to talk, Emily, we've talked about how do we make our supply last? How do we eke out that precious hay? But
Mm,
what do we do in terms of hay supply at the moment? Because everyone is, it seems, reading the forums and going on my own experiences and that of friends in the equestrian community, everyone's got a slightly different experience at the moment in
yeah.
terms of how much of a hay supply the existing supplier has got, but
Hmm.
also across the board, prices are ramping up, doubling, tripling in some cases. So, what do we do first and foremost if our supplier is low on hay? and we don't have access from our usual supplier.
Yeah, I think it's having that open conversation, your supplier being open and honest with you. And I think most of them are, from what we're hearing, which is absolutely fantastic. And I think what you need to do is word of mouth, speak to your fellow horse people, horse friends, community, ask if they are aware of anybody, of any suppliers who have availability, who have hay for sale. Then it comes, obviously, we're going to think about our individual feeding plan. It may be that you look at introducing some alternative forage options earlier. So, for example, we have chaffs, we have sugar beet. You can feed up to 50% of your horse's diet with oat or perhaps barley straw. That one does have caveats. Straw has a bit of a been linked to colic and people are worried about it, which I absolutely get. The thing with straw, again, introduce it very gradually and make sure that it is only fed to horses that have got good teeth because it is coarser, it takes a lot more chewing. So if your horse doesn't have good teeth, then, if they're older, I would avoid that. There's also mashes that can be fed, forage mashes. So if you're having concerns now, don't wait until your hay has run out or you're getting low and then you're in a panic about what am I going to feed. Start looking at alternative forage options now as well. And this is where speaking to that nutritionist is really going to help you work out what is going to be available for your horse. So, as I've said, chaffs, sugar beet, forage mixes, forage mashes, looking if addition of straw might be suitable for your horse. Take all of that into consideration now as well, would be the best way. Look on forums, see if anybody does have any hay available. Look outside of your region, because as I said, not every region in the UK is struggling the same way. So reach out perhaps to suppliers, across the UK, see what the state of play is for them. You're going to have to weigh that up then with delivery. Will there then be delivery costs on top of that? So this is where looking at thinking outside the box of just hay or haylage, is there any other forage alternatives that you can begin to feed now?
Mm. So many things to think about. And on top of that, horse owners feeling the pinch financially because this hay supply has rocketed up. We're seeing in
Yeah.
most regions that I've seen on forums, horse owners talking about an increase, whether that's a couple of pounds a bale. In some cases, it's doubled and tripled.
Mhm.
And then, as you mentioned, delivery costs for those having to seek and find hay further afield, huge delivery costs. And actually, in my case, our local hay people have put up their delivery costs anyway. It seems to
Mhm.
have doubled in line with the cost of hay because the amount of time they're spending on the road in this current hay crisis trying to get hay to
Yeah.
their customers. So how do horse owners deal with this increase in cost when we've taken
Mhm.
our horses on knowing that the rough prices of hay?
Yeah. So if you haven't already sourced your hay and there's people on your yard and you're able to get in with their suppliers, then hopefully if they are delivering that hay, you can share that cost of the delivery as well. So see what's already happening and if there is an opportunity for you to join those suppliers. The National Equine Welfare Council, I'm not sure if you've heard of those, Anna. You have, great.
Yeah.
It's an umbrella organisation of different charities and organisations. And last year and the year before, there was a survey that was conducted about how the cost of living crisis was affecting horse owners. And as you can imagine, last year and the year before, it was hard for a lot of people. So this year, it is genuinely very worrying that the cost of living crisis has continued, and now we're in this situation with the hay. We are under no illusions that this is going to really stretch and impact a lot of people, and we genuinely understand your concerns. If you are struggling financially, speak if you're on a livery yard, for example, if you can, speak to the livery yard owner. Look and see if there is any payment plan options whereby you could stretch out the cost of the hay if you're purchasing it. A lot of yards obviously offer hay as part of their package of the livery. If that's you and you're struggling, ask if you can stretch that payment, into the spring, into the summer, if perhaps you wouldn't normally be using or paying hay then, if they can accommodate that. We, the National Equine Welfare Council and ourselves, we do have separate advice on cutting costs without compromising your horse's welfare. That's available from our website at bhs.org.uk under our horse care and welfare advice sections. So go and have a read of that. Have a look and assess again, is there any other areas that you're not already doing whereby you might be able to save on some costs? And again, it's saving costs without compromising your horse's welfare, because otherwise it becomes a false economy. And, if you cut back in one area, or if you stop vaccinating, or you stretch out the length of time that you have your farrier, unfortunately, that is likely to not be a good result in the long run. Really have a look across all areas. Reach out, talk to people. Don't feel like you have to have this stress alone. It's really important to talk about your worries with other people. And the BHS, we offer a horse care helpline as well. We're very easily contactable at welfare@bhs.org.uk, or our helpline is 02476 840 517. We're here to help, and what we will do is listen to your concerns, try and help listen at what you've already done, and offer some alternatives as well, other suggestions if you haven't already considered those for your horse. So we definitely understand the pressures that this has put, and not only horse owners but farmers as well, who are in a similar situations perhaps with their livestock and the hay and straw supplies that they have as well. But certainly for horse owners, speak to your group of people, reach out, really, like I say, see if there's anywhere outside of your area that may have hay that you can access as well.
And it's always difficult, isn't it, trying to work out advice and help on how we can all, broadly speaking, improve our finances when this is totally unforeseen. None of us saw this hay
Yeah.
crisis coming, and the hay doubling and tripling and skyrocketing in price. None of us have had wage increases to,
Hmm.
in line with this. So it makes horse ownership all the more challenging. But really positive to know that you have a helpline that people can go to for support, which I had no idea about. So that's fantastic that people can go and vent their concerns and see if there's anything else they can be doing. And also, it's also interesting to hear that actually using this hay crisis, which is a really difficult time, and thinking how can we afford our next big hay delivery or hay order, to actually look across the board and see where we can cut costs, if there's anything that we're not doing or not thinking about, to kind of
Yeah.
reevaluate, much like we talked about in terms of feed management, but actually looking at what we're doing with our horses, and if there's any pennies that we can pinch and pounds we can gain back. And interestingly, what you were saying about making the hay last in terms of weight management, in terms of the hay crisis, trying to eke it out, trying to make it last longer, but also that could also help financially as well. If I think, and I'm open and honest about other winters gone by, and I think about the wastage that I have caused with hay by going out and turfing half a bale or a bale out and dotting it around the field for the horses, and we've got pet sheep as well, so and for the sheep to eat as well. And I think about
Yeah.
the amount that got trodden in and trampled and laid on, like you said. Actually, if I can try and save on that wastage, and use less hay, and use the slow release nets, and make
Hmm.
sure it's all up on the fence line in hay nets or in mangers or whatever it is you use to slow your horses down, actually you can save on all that wastage. And by using less hay, then you're saving money as well. And hopefully saving on, instead of the wastage going into the ground, it's going into your horse's belly, which is how I'm trying to file it in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely, Anna. And you pick up a vital point here as well, which I'm really pleased, because I wanted to discuss this as well. is wastage. How much hay ends up on your muck heap or trodden into the mud in the field? And interestingly, a feed company has done a blog about this, which is where I've got this information from. So there was a study completed, and in Europe, around 30% of hay or haylage fed to horses is wasted and ends up on the muck heap. So I think we can all, perhaps that's an action point for us as well, is to go away and have a look and see, if your horse is stabled and there's copious, think, okay, a small bit, if they pull from the hay net, you often get a little bit on the floor and the horse hasn't eaten it, for example. But if your horse is, you come in the morning and there's lots of hay all trodden and mixed in with their bedding, or they've left a huge amount, there's, a significant amount left, and that needs looking at. Is there a better way in which you can feed the hay to your horse whereby there isn't so much wastage happening? And again, look at that individual plan. Feeding hay ab lib would be the gold standard all day every day, but if there's hay being wasted, if your horse is on a controlled diet, we want to maximize the time our horse is eating. We need to look at all of this and see if there is a better and improved way. And I hopefully, if we, Anna, do you have a bit of a question for you? Do you sort of think how much hay then are you sort of is being wasted or being
Yeah,
lost,
100%.
with
So
your
this has
horses?
been much like our conversation about looking at our horses open honestly and working out whether they are
Mm,
overweight and being honest with ourselves more than anything else, because I know it's really hard to do that.
yeah,
But also in terms of waste, I've always sort of thought to myself, oh, I'm really good at that. And I sort of measure out how many sections the horses need and the sheep need.
yeah,
And then it was earlier this year, I was taking photos and videos of the horses in the field. And it was about early spring, just coming out of winter. And I looked with a different eye when I was sort of putting filters on the photos and editing them. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is not mud on the ground. That is a layer of hay like this
yeah,
that they have just left where I've scattered it around the fields. And I thought, that means one, I've been feeding too much hay that they've not eaten and they've got bored and they've gone off and nibbled at the hedge or they've nibbled at some grass that's growing. But also
yeah,
the way that I'm feeding it is not economical. It needs to be off the ground where they're not rolling in it, laying in it, pooing in it, quite frankly, and then
yes,
leaving it
yeah,
and discarding. If we're open and honest,
yeah,
our miniatures will
yeah,
go and wee on bedding or hay in the field. Um,
yeah,
so it's looking as well at how your animals are using that hay and realizing they will wee and poo on it and then not touch it. So this winter, it's my mission in this hay crisis. I've been putting everything into hay nets and looking at how many sections I'm giving, putting it in hay nets and then dotting it about the fence line in different places so that they don't squabble. And
yeah,
funnily enough, the sheep love a hay net as well. So making sure there's enough space for everyone. But it's been really hard to actually sort of own up to myself that I have wasted hay historically in all these
yeah,
winters gone by, because we enjoy putting hay on the floor in the fields. Or I know that I do, because it's lovely to see horses rooting through, picking out any bits of flowers
mhm,
there might be, finding little leaves and things like that in the hay, and having that option. It's nice to see them free flow eating instead of pulling at a
yeah,
hay net. But if at the end of the day it's getting wasted and trampled into the ground and not used, we have to think about that. So for me, that's my biggest point. Number one is what I'm changing this year is everything's in hay nets in the fields. And
yeah,
hopefully we don't get as much wastage. And then that's how I'm leveling the financial increase in my brain as
mhm,
well. In that, yes, we're paying double the price and double the delivery, but there'll be less wastage and
yeah,
there will not be that layer of hay across the mud
yeah,
next year. There won't be any hay on
yeah.
the ground at all.
So it's really helping to maximize the supply that you've got. And I've been there as a horse owner. I, I look back now and think, crikey, the amount of hay that I've thrown out onto the muck heap as well. And for example, you make again a great point, Anna. Horses naturally their heads down. Yes, they might have their heads up, sort of foraging in the hedge or picking at, a leaves and a tree, but generally their head and necks are down. It's that natural way of feeding. And again, it's that balance, isn't it? When we put it in hay net, it changes that. But, I used to feed my horse hay in the state when he'd come in the stable. I'd put it on the floor, I'd, rubber matting, bedding swept back. But by, morning, I'd probably say at least a quarter has ended up all in the shavings. It was completely non-edible and wasted. So I brought two big plastic tubs. I think they cost £3 each, safe, and I moved the hay off the floor and into the tubs. And just by doing that, it saved that last quarter of then ending up in the bedding. He was eating more of it. And it can be something as small as doing that, which can also help to maximize your hay supplies. So again, if you're out in the field, you could look at those big round plastic tubs. Only caveat, if it gets really windy, they might get blown away. But
Or rain,
it's
it might
not.
fill up with water.
Yeah, there's always these things, isn't there?
Oh,
But
no.
there are sort of it's sometimes it's a bit trial and error as well. See how it goes. And it could just be something as simple as that, which can make a big difference as well.
And also, you have to think about your schedule. We're all working really hard to try and afford our horses. We've all got limited
Yeah.
times. We're going up to our horses, seeing them several times a day, fitting it around work. Actually, it is easier, if we're honest, to throw hay, if they're out in the field, over the fence and scatter it about rather than filling hay nets. So again, something
Yeah.
I've had to do is time management, coming back to that planning again, building more time in to fill hay nets so that I'm not running about like a, crazy loon and late for everything, trying to build that
Yeah.
time in so that I can fill the hay nets, because it is so much easier just popping, a couple of sections over the fence, and then you can rush off.
100%.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
all these hidden
100%.
challenges, isn't it, really? You
Yeah.
you hear a hay crisis, you have your immediate financial worries and
Mm.
supply concerns and frenzies in some cases, as I've seen across the country in forums, people panicking about where they're gonna get it from.
Yeah.
I know I was ringing up our hay supply to see if they'd have enough over the next 6 months. But then it's all these strands and threads of things you never even
Mhm.
think about, of how it affects your day-to-day life with your horse. And talking about hay, we all estimate in our own minds how much our horse needs and how much they eat. But I've heard
Mhm.
that we should be weighing our hay. Is that true?
Yeah, so I think this will come in as part of looking at your feeding plan for your horse. And there's, as with anything to do with horses, there's not just an answer that I can give you here. It's so not black and white. It's so multicolored in looking at all the different factors for that individual horse. And also, as we've said, our circumstances as well. First of all, it's getting to know, is your horse at a healthy weight? So weigh tapes are a good guide. Sometimes they're not 100% accurate. If you've got access to a weigh bridge, use that. So I know a lot of veterinary practices, they offer weighing clinics as well. So again, if you've got a yard of people and the veterinary service, your veterinary practice offers that service, take it up would be my advice, so that you get an accurate weight. And then also get hands on and fat score, or also known as body condition scoring, your horse every couple of weeks. Because that's the first thing. We've got to know what are we starting with our horse? As you've said, are they underweight? Are they at a healthy weight? Or are they overweight or very overweight? So knowing that information, first of all, is going to really help us to work out, okay, I know my horse is overweight. I'm going to tailor their diet to ensure that they're getting everything that they need, but we're not going to be overfeeding. And with fat scoring, again, we've got videos, we've got advice on our website, bhs.org.uk/fat scoring. You can go to, have a look, and learn what points you need to be feeling on your horse to make that assessment. Keep an eye on them. If your horse is overweight and they start to gradually. We don't want sudden big weight losses because that is not healthy or safe. But that gradual weight loss, come the spring grass, hopefully, we're in a position where the spring does what spring does normally and that grass comes through. Your horse is going to be in a much better position if they're at a healthy weight. If your horse goes into the winter overweight and comes out overweight onto that spring grass, that's a danger zone for them. So when you are making that plan, I would definitely speak to a nutritionist. Get some hay scales, cost 2, 3, £4. Have a yard set. Make sure it lives in its place because I've been there as well, where you go to find the scales and where's the scales? Make sure that you are then weighing out your hay, weighing out your horse's feed if they need a bucket feed or if they're having that alternative forage, weigh it all out so you know exactly how much your horse is having and monitor. So if your horse is at a healthy weight and they start losing too much weight and they become too lean, too thin, then you know there's a problem. You've got to change it. Vice versa, if your horse is at healthy weight and they're starting to go up or too far down, you've got to change it. So monitor every couple of weeks, taking photos of your horse as well, because we see them all the time. It can be difficult to notice those small changes until it's suddenly, accumulated. And then weeks down the line, we're like, oh my goodness,
Totally, like
somebody,
me in the
you
fields.
know,
I didn't see the hay
yeah,
accumulating on the ground. So that's a prime
yeah,
example. It was in front of my eyes every day. I didn't see
yeah,
it until I looked at the photo of the fields. Same with our
yeah.
horses, 100%.
Yeah. And I tell you who's a really could be a really good, and they are great advocates of that, of noticing things, is our farriers. They come in
Yes.
every 4, 6, 8 weeks to shoe or trim our horses. Sometimes, farriers I've had great conversations with farriers where they've pointed something out and I was like, oh my goodness, how did, I've not noticed that. Or so, your farrier might, have a chat with your farrier and just say, how do you think they're looking? Get a fresh pair of eyes on your horse as well, and that can be a good thing. So taking photos, having a look, comparing last month's to this month's, you might spot something. Getting hands on with your horse, get to know your horse, the weigh tape, that's all really important, and then that will help you to feed in how much your horse needs to eat over the winter.
I'm realizing more and more, Emmeline, that this is hay crisis is bringing on the need for organization, planning,
Yeah.
and sort of graphs and weighing and management more than
But don't
maybe
be don't be
actually
scared by that. Yeah. Don't be
more than we've
scared
ever
by
done
that.
before.
Yeah. It can, as we said, there's multiple feed companies and the market range for food is huge. So it can get quite, worrying as to what to
Yeah.
do. So again, if you have a particular brand that you really like, using their products and feeding to your horse, give them a call. They will talk through and help you to formulate that feeding plan and diet of what might be suitable for your horse, especially for the older horses where teeth have naturally worn down, perhaps their
Mm.
dental health isn't as good, and that happens, can happen naturally. So it's looking at those forage, a lot of older horses, they can't physically chew hay anymore. So those forage alternatives, they've been in existence a long time, but it might just be something now. Think outside the box. It's not just older horses that, they can be applicable to all our horses as well.
Getting creative and investigating and find out what is on the
Yeah.
market for us. And
Yeah.
again, thank you for pointing out that these nutritionists associated to the feed companies are free, because I think we all hear nutritionists and we think that's another additional cost we have to add
Mm.
to our monthly or yearly horse bill, which is ever increasing, as you've mentioned, in the cost of living. So great to know there are nutritionists that we can call and there is no fee attached. So that's brilliant to
Yeah.
mention as well. I've got to ask you, Emmeline, we talk about storage of hay and making sure
Mhm.
that it's dry and it's clean so that our hay doesn't go mouldy. For
Yeah.
those in this hay crisis that have got access to barns and old stables and disused outbuildings, fantastic. I know that many people have been able to bulk buy hay and
Mm.
secure their forage for the winter, which is brilliant for those who can afford it. For the average
Yeah.
everyday horse owner, who cannot suddenly afford thousands of pounds worth of hay in huge bulk load and who don't have access to outbuildings, what can
Mhm.
we do DIY style to try and store extra hay that we might not be able to fit in our existing small store?
Yeah. So again, take this time to assess your current situation. So where you are able to store hay, have you had any issues in the past with hay being lost? Has there been some flooding? Has water accumulated up to a point that it has then affected the supply that you had there? So, have you got pallets to get the hay, first of all, up off the floor? Um, and also, how are you storing it? How are you layering it up, maximizing the way in which it is stocked in? I think it is a case again of talking to your supplier. Are they happy? If you've had that long term relationship with suppliers, they're often very happy to set up those weekly, every fortnightly deliveries. Are they still able to do that? Are they happy to do that? Or do they want you to perhaps purchase your hay, but they're happy to store it and then deliver it as is still needed? So I think it's really having and being very clear as to the supplier. Yes, I can supply. I'm happy to keep it for, payment upon delivery, or would they prefer this year to have, but they're happy to store it and deliver as per normal. So it's being really clear with the suppliers as well as to what capacity they have as well. Again, making sure that if when you do get hay delivered, that it is weatherproofed. So if you do have storage, is it a case of, can you get some waterproof sheeting? Can you get that over the top, secure it down? I know it can get a bit flappy and noisy. So again, just be careful if your horses aren't used to that, introduce them to it if it's near their stables. But, is there a way to, get some covering over that way?
Yeah, so you could pallet up
But
get some pallets, pile up your
yeah,
hay, and then get a tarpaulin pinned over the top of that to have as
yeah,
like an external supply, perhaps
yeah.
outside your stable.
But make sure that it is proper full on
Mm,
watertight, because what we don't wanna do then is hay gets wasted,
mouldy.
or, it's gone mouldy, it's been affected by the elements. Just have a look at what is available, what your supplier will do for you. We know it's not easy, but
Mm.
first thing is, last year, did you have hay lost because of the way in which it was stored? Can you get pallets? Look at, is there an area that's accumulated of rubbish? Now is the time to clear that out. And instead of having X amount stored there, the hay is going to take priority, and the hay is going to be stored there, and find a new home for that other equipment, etc., to really maximize your hay storage.
Some brilliant ideas there. And I've got to ask you, Emmeline. Oh, actually, hang on. Cut that, Teresa. Just to add on to that, in terms of you talking about opening up that conversation with hay suppliers, and this might not be possible for everyone, but we talked to ours and he knows our setup. He knows we've got a very small hay store on the stable
Yeah,
block, so he knows how many we can fit in. And he said, I'm going to now move some of my customers over from small bales to round bales because I know they have the storage and I know they would be happy to do this so that
yeah,
we can make more small bales available to you who has no room for big bales, for the big round bales. So that
yeah,
I thought was incredibly accommodating and actually not something I knew even to ask, but he just actually just put that forward and offered that, and we jumped at the chance. So again, if you've got a hay merchant or a supplier that's happy to have those conversations and maybe move some of the clients onto big round bales that have got big barns and big storage,
yeah,
then that might be something that can happen as well, because we had no idea and we were just really thankful that that was offered as an option. But we're talking, Emmeline, about the hay crisis, the weather we've been experiencing. We've mentioned climate change. You talked about the
mm,
yields that your farmer friends are seeing, the reduction in yields. Climate change has already reduced UK spring hay yields by 35%. Yours have seen, reduction 50%, 75%, with an additional 50% decline projected by 2080, which is
mm.
really changing the landscape for Britain's millions of horses. Is this something you discuss at the BHS in terms of what it's gonna look like for horse
Yeah.
owners in years to come?
Yeah. I think with climate change, the way in which we've lived, in which we've done things, is happening now, as we've seen this year. And we are going to have to look at how we manage and keep our horses. Winters have become milder and wetter. We've seen that through the amount of flooding that's happened. Places where before wouldn't have been flooded, they've experienced flooding for the first time. It's really caught them off guard and caught them out. So it's a really changing landscape. And I think what we've got to do is learn from and observe what other countries are doing in terms of how they're coping with the hotter, drier climates. What do they do? I think these steps that we've spoken about today to really hone in on wastage, storage, really maximizing our supplies, looking at alternative forage is really important as well. How we manage horses, don't have all the answers at all, do we, today? But it's an it's a changing landscape all the time. And as horse owners, we're going to have to adapt, and we're going to have to manage, and we're going to have to continually evaluate. It's something that BHS, we do definitely, it's something that we talk about often. It's a case of hot temperatures during the summer. We've seen, for example, riding schools where traditionally you'd have, at the weekend you've had lessons throughout the day, wouldn't you? Certainly when I was growing up,
Yeah.
if it was hotter, we'd go on a night, a walk, a hack, just because it was easier for the horses. And we've seen riding schools offer much earlier times, much later into the evenings as they adapt to those hotter weather conditions to safeguard their horses' welfare, but also keep their businesses going as well. So things are already sort of changing and happening from that perspective. We see perhaps changes to competition times, for
Yeah.
example, as well, so that, if it's extremely hot, competitions, racing have to change their programs. So I think it's a really changeable landscape and something that we're all going to have to continue and learn from. This will be a big learning curve, I think, for a lot of people, of sharing advice of what's worked, what hasn't worked, and then see what we can do going forwards as well. Sharing our experiences will be a big one.
Totally. And Emmeline, do you look ahead and worry about what horse ownership might look like in 5 years' time when we contemplate the cost of living crisis, climate change, and the hay crisis, and what we're going through at the moment?
I think it's difficult in such a changeable world when we look back on what happened from 2020 to 2025. I don't think any of us could have predicted what has happened in these 5 years. From 2025 to 2030, who knows what that landscape. And I think it's don't be fearful of it. I think what we've got to do is, as a community, horse owning community, our equine industry, we've got to always pull together, and we've got to be there to support each other and our farming community as well, and support each other through whatever might come up. We can't predict. In a couple of years, this might have settled down, and the cost of living crisis, and hopefully everything will be a lot calmer and a lot more stress free, but we just don't know. We just don't know what is going to happen. So I think by being supportive, talking to each other, having that community mindset, certainly at the BHS, we are here to help people. We're here to support our approved centres, our accredited professional coaches, our members, all of those horse owners in this community of what we're looking at and what we're dealing with and what we're coping with. And I think if we can hold that mindset, whatever then is thrown at us, because there will always be something, more than likely, we can try and work out and find that solution and that support going through together.
Emmeline, thank you so much for coming on Curious Equestrian, and thank you for bringing a real sense of positivity and productivity around this subject, because I know there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of panic, and
Yeah.
I've certainly felt it, and I know many have in the equestrian community. So thank you for making us feel in control, and that with some creativity, imagination, investigation, and lots of planning, we can get
Yes.
through this. And being adaptable to the challenges that are inevitably ahead, it makes it feel like actually we can do it. We've got the confidence. We've got it within our control, but we've just got to pull together, and we've got to be more flexible in the way that we think. So thank you for sharing all your hints and tips and advice. I know it's certainly helped me and will help so many in the equestrian community.